It is? Okay, well, that clock's wrong, so Mr. Benson, if you could direct the town staff to fix the clock, we'd appreciate that. Notice on time in the presence of a quorum, I call the July 9th, 2019 Finance Committee to order. This is being recorded on Acton Public TV, so if anybody is recording this, please make them known to the chair at this time. Hearing nothing from anybody. First item agenda item is public participation. Anybody from the public?
No problem.
Hearing none, we'll move on to the second one, to our finance of the new school building, etc. And I will let Mr. Cole speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is basically just an opportunity for me to get feedback from the committee. I'm looking not for an official vote or anything like that, just a sense of the committee, try and make sure that I'm looking at the options, and I'm hoping that other people can maybe spark some conversation, spark some food for thought. So the charge of the, and here we go with the acronyms, Acton Boxford Regional School District School Building Committee Finance Subcommittee, which was only expected to meet 3 or 4 times, is to come up with a couple of answers to questions. The first of which being, do we want to look at a 20-year or a 30-year bond payout, which is interesting enough on its own. We can discuss that. But the second one, the fixed principal versus fixed payment, is the topic that I'm definitely looking for feedback on, because I can, depending on my mood in the day, I can be all for one opinion or the other. And then the last one is just a conversation about anything else that could be sort of out of the box thinking. Do we want to do a 23-year fixed? Do we want to do a 25-year fixed? Do we want to do, apparently it's within our purview to do something very strange, like have X payment for 10 years and Y payment for 20 years thereafter. And part and parcel of trying to think out of the box is, do we want to prepay as much of this up front so that we take out the smallest possible bond, even though that might have a greater impact on hurting current spending abilities, or do we want to just bond as much as we can right from the start? So just a real quick reminder of the timeline that we're looking at here. We are indeed looking to have an authorization of debt for December 10th with a town's-wide ballot set for December 17th. But I want to be very clear that this is not the actual bonding date. You can't take out on a bond on a project that's not completed yet. So what we'll end up doing is which I think is exactly the same thing that Minuteman did and some of the other projects in town as well, taking out bands, which are bond anticipation notes. You use those until the work is complete. Then you're actually allowed to bond for the full final building. And that obviously won't be for a couple of years until construction is complete. It's also, jumping back to the top, sorry to jump out of order here, it's also important to remember that the number that we're authorizing on December 10th is subject to some amount of fluctuation. There's going to be a MSBA boilerplate template of what needs to be said to be legal and authorized. But I do want to make sure we set the stage for, obviously we're going to have as accurate a number as we possibly can, but that is not an absolute set in stone final number. So that's just a quick thing on the timeline. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the item of this that I find the most intriguing or the most conundrum-y is the 2 types of bonding. Level principal and level payment, they're exactly what they sound like. A level principal is that all payments have the same principal amount with a decreasing interest portion. And then the other one, which may be more familiar to us homeowners out there, is level payment. All of the payments are exactly the same, but the ratio of principal to interest changes over time. And I will call up the spreadsheet that Mr. Vertolino pulled together so that we can visualize that a little more clearly. So, drilling into the fixed principal concept a little more clearly, the principal amount stays steady for every single payment. So basically, we're taking the amount of principal and cutting it up by the number of months of the term, period. The interest is over and above that principal, which means that again, monthly payments, monthly payment amounts degrade over time as less interest is required. But that also means that from a budgeting perspective, you have to be aware of the fact that every year the amount that you're going to have to pay in the course of that year is different. It's decreasing, which is a good thing, but it is different. It's not a steady, easy number to plug into your budget sheet. On the other side of the house, the fixed payment side, completely static charge. Every monthly payment is exactly the same. This is very much like you're used to when paying a mortgage. The proportion of the interest goes down over time. And the one thing that I want to point out is, while it is easier to predict how much you're going to pay in any year, the overall costs over time are more. Because by paying a fixed principal, you're paying down principal faster than doing a fixed payment, which has your principal amount increase, your principal portion of your ratio increase over time. So this is, couldn't do that. The ponderables question, this is just meant to draw an illicit conversation, and if people want me to pull up the spreadsheet first before we get into the ponderables, I'm happy to do that. But when I'm trying to decide which of these, F5, thank you. Which of when I'm trying to decide which of these I like better, I like the idea of the fixed principal. When I'm in a fixed principal mood, I like the fixed principal idea better because it is less expensive over time, and it is more mirroring the depreciation of the value of the building. So you're paying a little more upfront, but you've got a brand new building. So a brand new building is worth a little more to me than a building that's 20 years old. So the payment in that 20th year is less money than the payment in the first year. So it feels more like depreciation. When I am in a fixed payment kind of mood, I like the idea of not having as large a postal step function in that first year of paying the bond, because every year is going to be exactly the same. It's predictable. There's not going to be as large a step up that first year as having the fixed principal. So I know in spirited conversations with Mr. Barrett last year about the pros and cons of these two, you'll be happy to hear I'm not quite as fixed in my ways as I once was. But I do keep coming back to wondering if, well, I'm gonna leave it here and ask for people's comments, thoughts, first blush. If you want me to pull up some real life examples of the two of them, we can go ahead and do that now. So I'll make this bigger, but first let me be very clear. There's a number of suppositions in here that we're just going to have to take as suppositions for illustrative purposes. Please do not take any of these numbers as the current expected set in stone number for the school project. So again, for now, the only variable I'm going to change is whether we do level principal or level payment. So we're going to keep just the random number, semi-random number that was used for the total cost of the school project. I'm going to use 30 years just as the life of the loan. We can continue to play with this, and everybody can take a look at it later at their own discretion of wanting to play around with the spreadsheet. And I'm also going to keep the interest rate the same, even though I do want people's feedback on whether they think 3.5 is the right number to be at, 20 years versus 30 years. And these are all things I want feedback on. But keeping the only variable that we're going to play now is level principal versus level payment. So again, what I'm showing here, with all the other variables being the same, a level principal loan with all these other variables would save about $6.8 million to the total cost of the project, or call it $5.8 million to the town of Acton over the life of the loan. Now, of course, these are 30-year away dollars, so take that into account, take inflation into account as well. But this is the raw cost and raw difference in cost. Then I also do want to, the other thing that I'll put level back in, but I want to show how the payment structure looks. Obviously, this is level payment, so Acton 3545. So this is where it gets interesting, because level payment, it's 3.5 million every year, period. Whereas with the level principal, the first year is a much larger, heftier lift at 4.45 million. And we don't get below that 354 number until year 12. It does mean that years 12 through 30, we're paying less and life is good, but it's much more of a bigger chunk to swallow right from the start. Now, obviously, this delta does get impacted by whether we do a 20-year or 30-year loan, and it also gets impacted by whether or not we're at 3.5, which is the conservative number that the subcommittee is using now as what we anticipate the cost of the interest rate on the loan will be. But obviously, if we go with the most recent rates for a 30-year, which is 2.55 as of today, then the delta here, the uplift here, is not quite as large. So again, we don't have to make up our mind today, and honestly, the Finance Subcommittee doesn't have to make up its mind by December 10th either, although we're supposed to make recommendations, make suggestions to the school committee in the early fall. But how do people feel about paying the debt early in the form of fixed principal versus paying a fixed cost for all 30 years and not taking a depreciation approach to bonding?
Steve, I suspect this is a question for you. How have we tended to bond projects like this?
So in the past, in 2001, when the schools built the Parker Damon School, they used mortgage-style kind of level payment. When we did the PSF in 2006, we did level principal. So, I've seen it both ways. So it's really open to the entity. It's, You know, on the town side, we've mostly done, I believe, level principal. But I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I've seen it both ways.
Is there an advantage to owning more of the building sooner on? I know that for my house, I can get a home equity loan, or I have less of a liability if I own more of my house. Is there an advantage to having less debt outstanding?
You know, there's really no, you know, debt to equity or anything like that kind of implications that roll through. I mean, the bonds will be rated and graded, and as Jason and I've kidded, once we float a bond, then Moody's or S&P has a right to comment on that bond over the life of the bond. But there are no kind of standard debt to equity issues that you would run into in a municipal environment.
Thanks, Jason. I like the principal, the when we pay more upfront, the principal payment there. However, I think if you go to a 20-year, you might want to go the other way. I don't know if that's just because of the payback time. I like that you know, you do a principal, one of the principal is, have you shown we're saving money in the long term. And we know eventually that we're going to have 2 other schools that are possibly going to have to be replaced as well for the district. So if you free up cash sooner, you can use that sooner to do the other things that you have to do. I think that, you know, probably a good idea for the fire station as well.
For the fire station, this is my personal opinion, for the fire station, since it's a significantly smaller number, there is no reason not to do level principal, because the uplift in those first couple of years is more manageable. Similarly, if, you know, God help us, but if we're in a sub 2% interest rate environment, then level principal becomes even more appealing. Where it becomes difficult to justify, in my opinion, is at this 3.5, God help us, 4.5 interest rate.
Also, listening a little bit slow down the economy, they're talking about cutting interest rates right now, this month, or possibly the following.
Let me be clear, I'm not rooting for a recession in any way, shape, or form.
No, I'm not either.
But, you know, if interest rates are at 2 versus 3.5, that is a huge change on $130 million.
Absolutely. Steve, doesn't the amount of outstanding debt that the town has go against our bond rating?
Absolutely.
So Moody's view that if you have a principal, you're going to make it, the quicker you pay that down, you pay down that bond, the better your bond rating theoretically should be.
You know, with this kind of purchase, you know, the $100 million, at some point in time, it's all principal due and payable. So whether it comes off in, you know, $5 million chunks over 20 years, or it kind of moves a little bit, all of the principal is counted against your bond rating. I haven't seen the analysts get too much into the style or how it was placed, the debt, in terms of when they come in and they grade us. You know, they haven't got into that kind of weeds where they have asked us about some of our decisions, whether it was level payment or level principal.
Can I follow up, Mr. Chairman? They do care about the percentage of your yearly budget goes to debt payment versus operating budget, correct? And in this environment, after year 12, that ratio looks even better, correct?
Oh, they absolutely monitor the, you know, the debt ratios, and, you know, if you have 15% of your budget going towards debt in year 1 and 12% the next year, that, you know, that looks better. But they absolutely, you're right, they absolutely look at it in terms of like a debt margin. But this would be excluded debt as well. So with excluded debt, it kind of, it has a little bit of a different feel to it.
How is the MSBA reimbursement done? Is that level payment?
I'm not sure. Mike, do you know?
Yeah, that's one question I had, is when that reimbursement kicks in. I understand once you pay 100%, then you get your percentage rebate versus an ongoing, you submit an invoice and they discount it by whatever the reimbursement is. I'm not sure, I'm really not quite sure.
I'm just going on I mean, the MSBA money coming in on the Parker Damon has been the same amount every year that I can remember. So I'm thinking it must be a level payment type reimbursement, even though it sounds like, no, that would have been a level payment loan.
Reimbursement.
Right, okay, so the reimbursement follows the style of loan. How long is the building good for?
We are, the plan is for this to be a 50-year building. 50.
So it's a long-lived asset. You might as well spread the cost over as long a period as you can.
Okay.
And I don't know that it makes that big a difference at these interest rates, whether it's level payment or level principal. I think the lower the interest, the less difference there is.
Right.
But the kids that are going to go to this school, well, they're born, you know. But for the most part, this will be educating kids who aren't born yet and parents who haven't moved to town yet. So my advice, my opinion is spread it out as long as you can.
So
minimize the tax impact today.
So that's, I clearly hear 30 years, but do you weigh in on fixed principal versus fixed payment?
My rough understanding of it is fixed payment would put less of a burden on the taxpayers today than,
It does, but it costs more over time.
you know, like I said, I won't be around in 30 years, so I won't enjoy the benefit of it.
If the MSBA follows the type of payment option that we take, that means that the fixed principal, the principal payment would, under that scenario, would get paid back faster by MSBA.
I'd have to look into it. I don't want to speak on that because I don't know the answer, but your
Theoretically,
logic follows.
Theoretically, so you may want to check with Dave Erdelino.
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah, I think there's something, I sort of tend to agree with Steve, but there's something to be said to have a longer term, predictable payment amount. If we were aggressive with the fixed principal, you know, that is an aggressive strategy, and in 30 years, we'd save money, but.
The break-even point is 12.
What's that?
Break-even point is 12 years.
12 years. But in 30 years, I'll be 100 plus. So, you know, I don't want to say it's not my problem then, but I think just from a finance point of view, I think if you have, looking at the ledger and the budgeting aspects, I think just if you have the same predictable amount every month for the term, it makes sense. And as Steve also said, the fixed principal amount really puts the burden, the savings, you know, the people today will be burdened with the extra payment, even though their children and grandchildren will receive the benefit of the of the savings by you're front loading the fixed principal payment. So yeah, I just think it puts a burden on the people today versus people in 30 years paying their fair share. They get the benefit, and a lot of things can happen in the next 30 years. So again, I would tend to, at least at this point in time, vote for the fixed payment schedule.
I'd love it if we could find some way to get close to a number that would represent the difference in the average tax bill in one over the other.
Fair enough. I did not come prepared with that tonight.
It would depend on the year, Christine. First few years, yeah, one will be more than then.
I'd like to see 13 years worth.
And what's magic about 13 years?
At year 12, the level principal number is lower than the level payment number. So that's when it's a better deal. So how much of a worse deal is it for the first 12 years?
And to be honest, I couldn't believe the coincidence of it being between 12 and 13 years, which is the lifespan of a student if they come in before kindergarten.
And to some degree, it's the lifespan of a resident.
Sadly, yes.
There are a lot of people that move in.
Which is part of the reason.
The sign goes up the week before graduation.
Which is part of the reason why I actually think, I respect what you and Mike said, but I almost feel that argues in the opposite direction. It argues towards if the people who are going to get this benefit are only going to be around for one cycle, they should be the one to pay the most for it.
Oh, no, Mike and I are arguing from the, our youngest graduated a long time ago point of view.
Both of mine will be out of school, are already out of elementary school. They'll be out of the school district shortly after this opens up. And we better not have any grandkids in time to enjoy this first 12 years school.
Given that it sounds like there's no advantage to owning more of the building sooner, I have an inclination in that regard towards level payment. I do kind of agree with you that people who use it now should be the ones who pay for it, but it sounds like that also just burdens everyone. My one question about it with the level principal is whether there would be a potential of taking that money that we're no longer paying and switching it over to maintenance, or are the dollars just so far out of whack?
So remember, this is excluded debt. So
yeah.
it's not part of the budget. It cannot be relocated later because it's excluded debt. So it automatically means that there is while the first couple of years are going to be hard for the taxpayer to adjust to, the burden for the debt only gets easier over time. For me, it all comes down to what the interest rate is. I mean, if we're looking at a 2 or a 2.25, then I think the level principal makes more sense. The larger the interest rate,
When do we think what year do we think we'll actually bond the project?
the best case scenario 2023, realistically 2024.
Principal falls off and I'm be retired, so that can help me.
So again, we don't have to, you know, I'm happy to hear multiple points of view on this, but I definitely, hopefully we'll understand why I'm not as cut and dried on this one as I normally am.
It's not someone's cut and dry either. You don't see how the numbers bear out.
One last comment. If we had the aggressive pay down schedule of fixed principal, if looking at it from the long view, from the more senior members of the community, that would put a bigger burden on my tax bill than necessary. So from that point of view, from the more seasoned community members, I think, from that point of view, I would vote for the level payment schedule for, over 30 years. Just, why should I pay more taxes than I have to accomplish the same objective? We still get to school at a good interest rate.
Yeah, but it's
you pay it down
money.
quicker,
it's
I
all
understand.
Money. It comes down to money, right? So the month after I started on this committee, Bill Mullins came back and he said, you need to treat everything that you decide on behalf of this town as if it's your money. And I come from a very conservative fiscal perspective where I want to protect my money. And in 30 years, which is not a ridiculous time horizon for me, I want to pay as little as possible. So it all depends on your level of aggressiveness and your level of risk. And I do tend to be on the more fiscally conservative side of I want to pay the smallest amount to get it done.
You may also need some votes from some senior citizens.
I am definitely aware of that.
So
Definitely aware of that. And this is where
The-
the
the-
Finance Subcommittee goes into the politics side.
the object of the game is to get it passed.
Is there an interest rate tipping point that we could have our eye on, since we have time? 2023 is when this is going to have to be decided. Perhaps there's an interest rate tipping point where even as a senior, you'd go, well, that's too good a deal to pass up, and we just watch the interest rates and, then go from there.
Problem is, right now, people can't tell you whether interest rates are going up or down in 3 months.
Right, so just have the number
And,
in our pocket.
By the time this thing goes to actually be bonded, we could have gone through a recession, can come back up, and the Federal Reserve maybe trying to put the brakes on an expansion, and rates go through the roof. So it's pretty hard to, and especially over 30 years. Even what looks like a big number, when you state, well, it's X amount of extra interest over the life, and you divide it by 30, and it gets lost in the rounding of a $100 million budget.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Point of view drafting committee group, who's gonna, all right. While we're waiting for Christine to come back, if anybody would like to take a look, it's just something for, just for fun, is take a look at the national debt clock. It does say what the unfunded pension liabilities are in the country, which is in the trillions.
Okay, a subset of the drafting committee met on Sunday, and we made some changes. While they weren't looking, I made some other changes. It's just more colorful.
Committee should be commended for meeting on Sunday.
It's not a committee meeting.
Nope, just a drafting group. This did not change. This did not change.
I couldn't possibly get you in any more trouble than you are already.
This did not change, though we did note that after this year, we will have to remove unused tax levy from this slide. So the debt service slides now start here, prior to 1210 and after 1210. Given that we will be presenting this prior to 1210 and after 1210, they're both on here now. These are projections, they're estimates. They're the best guess we have at this time. Yep. So the blue and the red stay the same, and then just stack right on top are the other three.
The idea is that we will bond Minuteman immediately, but wait to bond the fire station until 2021?
We've already bonded Minuteman. We're just executing the debt exclusion that's our responsibility and has been for the last couple of years.
So we've been paying we've been doing
I'm
bands,
sorry.
right?
But it's not part of the 2017, 2018, or 2019 budgets?
We're doing it.
It is, but it is as part of the operating budget. It is not part of the debt service. It's not part of the debt exclusion. This is the debt exclusion service.
I'm wondering why it's not on the first chart, and I don't think you've explained that to me yet.
Because it's part of the operating budget, and the first slide is the debt.
This is our debt.
Excluded debt service, not operating budget.
It's about to become excluded, is that correct?
That's what we're voting on the 10th.
How is it excluded for the years that have already occurred?
Okay. So it's our responsibility to pay no matter what. There's two ways of paying it. You can either pay it within Proposition 2.5 and have it be part of the operating budget. So you're taking your new tax money and applying it to cover that expense that you've incurred. What we're suggesting on December 10th is taking that $230,000 a year and taking it out of the Prop 2.5 responsibility, making a debt exclusion for it. So this is what this slide is the excluded debt, not debt that's being paid for by operating budget.
I understand that. On the next chart, it shows it as excluded debt for 3 years that will have already occurred.
What?
It shows up on 2017, 2018, and 2019.
No, it doesn't.
It's the slide,
It's the
it's
color.
not, there are no numbers there, it's 0. I don't know why it's orange on top.
If we could,
I will do my best to remove that color.
thank you, that was
This
the
is a
confusion.
Google spreadsheets issue. So we just made a slight change to the sub-bullet on this one. We don't have these numbers yet, but we hope to soon.
How is the first one is decreasing by 4 years by 1 million, decreasing at 9 years by 3 million? That should not be a concern. That should be great news.
It's not a concern, it's more a statement of the current situation prior to voting in the new debt. But it's on this page because it's related. And under the state of the town, there's nowhere to put it unless we have a whole other slide. I'd rather not. But what I could do is remove the bullet, and it's just at the top as a statement of the situation.
Yeah, I think that'd make it a little clearer.
The concern is projected debt, not existing debt, but the fact that some of it's going down, mitigates the concern about projected debt. But the concern is taxes are going up.
Right. So yeah, I will do that. I'll make it simply a statement at the top as it relates to debt.
Debt payment cost of $5 million. Is that minusing out the $1 million from the bullet above?
It's from last year's.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that, a decrease in 4 years of $1 million, but over the next 5 years, we're going to add $5 million, so we're getting $4 million above where we are now, type of thing.
Okay.
Because you're adding 5, taking away the 1.
Like I said, when I sent out all those slides on debt service, we don't have all the numbers.
Yeah.
So there's no sense nitpicking the slide on numbers because I made a whole bunch of assumptions.
Yeah, these numbers should change.
Yeah, but we need to get the numbers.
Right. Thank you.
This has not changed. Yes, absolutely.
How about we say for concerns that the debt will increase? That's what we're concerned about. We are actually not concerned about proposed debt. We want the debt to happen, but the debt is going to increase.
Okay, so this has not changed in a couple of years. We simply added the Middlesex retirement assessment to our concerns. Yes, the numbers have been adjusted for this year. This one's been updated. If there are any other capital items that you can think of that we should be on this slide, I'd like to know about it. So I'm really close to this microphone. So this is the lead-in to a couple of slides about reserves. One here, I know, it's going to show up, right? Which I need to make darker. Shows our certified reserves for the past 8 years. It was asked for me to find a way to show the reserves as a percentage of the town operating budget. So I have the reserves on the operating budget, or the original reserve slide looked like this, and I have the percentage that that reserve represents of the town operating budget. I seem to have exceeded Google spreadsheets' ability to do more, and I'm happy to work with Excel if we want it to look a different way than one of these three.
I think this one is thoroughly confusing. Something is 11.7% of 9 million, is what that chart says.
Right,
for
that's
years
my concern.
2015.
I can't get all of it onto one slide. I'd love to have the total operating budget with a second bar showing the reserves, with a percentage over it saying what percentage of the budget that is. I think I can accomplish that. I just need to find a better software.
I think you just show the absolute amount of the certified reserves, and another tier show the percentage that that represents of operating budget. Because the concern here is that it's declined.
So this number, but
it's declined in absolute terms, and it's declined in percentage terms.
Right. Okay. So I will take the percentages off of here and show them in a separate slide, or indicate them in some other way.
Or you could have two little boxes on the same slide.
What? They get really small that way. All right. So none of my 3 slides. Fine. Kmart. We added this slide, not because we have a recommendation about it, simply because it is big and impactful and happening. Is everybody okay with this slide?
Can we say something to the effect of Kelly's Corner unknown? Just making it clear, we're not concerned about Kelly's Corner. We're concerned about things happening around Kelly's Corner. I don't want it to get caught up in people, again, being worried about how much money we're spending.
Right.
Do we have to pay Kmart for the use of their big K logo?
Stole it from the internet. Yeah.
Basically, we're saying about this slide that there's going to be an elephant in the room, and it's going to be Kelly's Corner. Even though we don't have any details, we know it's sneaking up on us.
Right. We don't have a specific position.
I think we have to distinguish between Kelly's Corner as a concern and Kmart as a concern, because we're not concerned so much about Kelly's Corner, but we're concerned about the impact of the Kmart parcel on Kelly's Corner.
Yeah, maybe Kelly's Corner title is inappropriate. It should be Kmart parcel, or the infrastructure or something, but not Kelly's Corner.
Okay.
I think to the people in town, it means the infrastructure that's currently going on, and this is really like phase 2 or 3.
Is it safe to just say concern Kmart transition? Is it going to get transitioned one way or the other?
Kmart transition might be a good title for that.
Okay. And then the rest of it about the Kmart parcel currently for sale, long-term redevelopment, all that's okay, right? Okay. Jason, I found a better word than not anticipatable. Are you okay with it?
Sounds great.
you're thinking?
I don't know,
Unforeseen.
unforeseen maybe.
You can always imagine.
You just put unforeseen capital needs
Sure.
instead of unforeseeable capital. What do you mean? What's, people view that as, oh, they're going to buy a new $750 million ladder truck, $750,000 ladder truck. Put in the new fire station, then we're not looking at buying a new ladder truck. They might see it that way, or something else that they see as excess.
Absolutely. Unforeseen capital needs. Okay.
I don't know whether we should bring it up at this slide or not, but there is the distinct possibility in the next 3 years there'll be a recession. And certainly if the ALG wants to go out 5 years, I'd say there would be almost a guarantee within 5 years. Look back at some of our history in 2008, and while 2008 and 2009 were very nice years, the lag effect of the economic downturn produced 3 straight years where we didn't have any revenue growth at all. Now, I don't think anybody's talking about another 2008, but if it's even 20–25% as bad, we're probably looking at 1 year of no revenue growth, in which case we may need those reserves.
So you had said that there was a 2-year lag townwide.
Generally, yeah, because what happens is, property values don't immediately fall. Assessments take a couple of years to catch up to property values, and then you start seeing the problem. State aid also tends to go down because their revenue is based on current income tax, sales tax, economic activity. So that flattened out. There was a long period of time when we didn't get any increase in excise taxes because everybody in town held on to the cars they had for a few more years. So the combination of all these things resulted in, like I said, 3 years of pretty flat growth, even though we were pushing up the taxes 2.5% a year.
So I want to make sure that the meaning of this, the last major bullet, has not been lost. We're not encouraging drawing down our reserves at this time.
Yeah.
The word that's missing in here, and it was in previous years, is only, encouraging reserves only for one-time items.
I would almost, sorry, go ahead.
Which makes a big difference in whether or not we're encouraging the use of reserves for capital items. No, we're encouraging that reserves only ever be used for true one-time items. And that changes the meaning of that last bullet. Because we are not, as a committee, I do not believe that we're encouraging the drawdown of our reserves to our floor at this time.
I might even go further and say minimize the use of reserves.
I'm fine with that. So minimize using reserves. Reserves should only be used for one-time items.
Well, unforeseen or emergencies. I mean,
Okay.
At this point, the school should have a capital covered in their CIP program.
And their stabilization fund.
Right. Town has a stabilization fund. So, yeah, I would almost say, now it may be splitting hairs, but I'd say minimize the use of free cash in E&D. Because you're right, stabilization funds could cover capital needs or one-time items.
Yeah, I think over the last couple of years, that second bullet has got too soft.
I'm not done. So if we have a 2-year head start on any kind of recession, is it fair to be ready, willing, and able to talk to it should it come up in a POV, but not necessarily present about a potential recession at this time?
I think since whatever chapter of the bylaw says we are charged with long-range planning, I think we have to work it into a POV at some point, or we look naive.
Is this the year that you really want to, from a political perspective, is this the year that we want to say we want to talk about recession in the first time that we go for a capital override in 15 and 18 years respectively?
It's out there in the general public knowledge. We're about to make some very long-term decisions. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but my fear was that this impact would occur in 2023, 2024, right when you're trying to, bond this thing. Now, probably it'll be too late at that point. But I don't think we can ignore it. We don't have to, if you want to say it's a point of view only about next year, you can ignore it.
So one of the things that...
But if you want to talk about anything beyond next year, which we're spending a whole lot of time talking about things that are going to happen beyond next year in terms of debt and schools and stuff.
So one of the suggestions that was made was, rather than, hanging a lantern on, we are actively afraid of a recession, we were thinking of putting a slide, and I'm sorry, I didn't get the verbiage to you in time. We were thinking of putting a line in at the last section of the state of the town, stating a realization that we're in the longest expansion in history, and that we are aware of the fact that expansions are not permanent. But I want to be a little careful not to be too...
Well, if you can have a recession type slide, and you can very well say that if we miss a year's revenue sometime in the next 3 or 4, we actually have the free cash in E&D to absorb the hit. The flip side of that is it's going to be real hard to get that back up. Right. Or if it goes any deeper than that, then we will be in trouble.
So I do owe you that slide, Christine. I will get it to you. I just didn't get it done between Sunday and now. 3,700 pounds of equipment in the last 2 days. That's all I have to say.
Okay. Yep.
I think for the last bullet point that we're really saying only use reserves for one-time items.
So I have minimized use of reserves in E&D, period, as a second bullet point, and a third bullet point, reserves in E&D used only for one-time items, or only use reserve in E&D for one-time items.
I just think we want this strong up front.
I will put only in there, front and center.
I do agree with Steve that we need to be talking more about recession coming and all this changing. There's just a lot of weird stuff, as we discussed, some coming in the markets in general.
Yeah, I mean, haven't seen me on my desktop every day, pretty much, and hearing bits and pieces doesn't do my job. And it's a concern that's out there on the horizon. We don't know what the Feds are going to do. We don't know if they're going to cut interest rates next month, or this month, later this month, or next month, or September, or whatever. Some of them are saying now 2 rate cuts this year. The Fed kind of came out today and said, well, everything's going well, we're at record employment, et cetera. However, in the last couple of days, 2 companies, one Deutsche Bank globally, but it's going to impact the U.S. obviously, they're laying off 16,000 people. Another company in Jacksonville, Florida, has a call center, they're laying off 225. You hear bits and pieces of other companies laying off here and there. Auto sales for the last quarter were down. Not surprising. When I was at the dealer the other day, again, my oil change, they asked me, I said, sales are slower. We know when sales are slower, that impacts the town because people are not buying as many new cars, which means they're not, or newer cars, which means the excise taxes are staying the same or going down. We do hit a recession, new car sales gets pushed off. Excise tax revenue goes down because people who have the newer cars, their cars are depreciating in value, and your rate that you pay the town goes down. So those are all economic headwinds that we run into in a recession. The 4th of July, I went to Narrow Park, and I parked in the industrial park, and the only place I could park was at Insulet. And I could not believe the size of the building was there. It's massive. And it's great to see because that adds into our tax base. On the other end, that's a tailwind for us. That's great. They have 5 or 6 plug-in stations for full electric cars. You know, and that's kind of the way that things are going too. So that's an infrastructure build-out that the town will have to, and business in the town will have to address going forward. So there are both tailwinds and headwinds in any economic scenario. You know, you can get a 40-year mortgage for your house if you want to. I did that. My son would inherit a nice mortgage for himself. But that's the type of things that's happening. School debt is, people are in school debt, so what's happening? Are they moving to a town of Acton? And they're young? No, they're not. They're delaying off having families, and they move in later in life. We have an aging population, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the last thing I read yesterday was that our life expectancy now in this country has fallen. And that's due to the opioid crisis and things like that that are happening. So you kind of have to look at it as a whole giant picture, but I agree with Steve that within 5 years, we're most likely going to be in some form of a recession. Now, it's how fast can the feds react to that? Who knows? It all depends who's in power and if they stay off Twitter. I won't, but you might.
Okay. The bottom of the OPEB slide has changed, and I have not yet created Appendix B.
What are we paying down on OPEB every year right now, Steve? Steve B, what are we paying on OPEB every year? Either one.
So we're paying, we're paying our normal costs for our retirees as well as about $650,000 out of the town budget. It pretty much is coming close to our arc, I guess, from...
You missed my presentation last time. All that terminology we learned.
I hear it was a riveting presentation.
650, thank you. I don't know if we should say something about that the town puts an additional 650, you know, meeting its obligation plus an additional 650 to bring down that delta.
The town's current level is 650. If you want us to say, continue funding at the level of 650, that's fine. But the thrust of this slide is that we are explicitly saying the school district has got to increase, take what they've been paying for the last couple of years and increase it by $100,000 a year.
Okay.
Can we change it so it says town should continue funding and school district should?
Why?
Because it's not clear that, yeah. It wasn't clear to me that that's what this was saying. Something about the schools district and then increase funding.
It's a recommendation.
That's my recommendation.
Christine hates more words.
That's words.
This slide was just cleaned up a little bit, but the sentiment hopefully has not moved beyond what the committee has already approved.
At our last ALG meeting, the schools is going to be doing that.
They have it up, they said.
They have it up, and I would like to see the town do the same thing, Mr. Barrett. You can bring it up with your boss. Because if the schools are doing it, the town should obviously be doing that as well.
Perhaps Mr. Benson and the other selectmen present should notice that too.
Yes, I would bring that back to the town manager, that the schools are doing that we should be doing the same thing. Because it kind of says, hey, this is what our projects are, this is where we spent the money, this is what's knocked off, kind of so you can see where the money goes.
So here is where we say it a little more bluntly. The committee did not want to presume, the drafting group did not want to presume that this committee would recommend the override, especially since we haven't seen any of the numbers. Okay.
Is there any, the wording under the MSBA logo that you have on the bottom? You can't read it.
Oh, it's theirs. It's just a light gray.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can find a better, when it
That's-
prints, you can read it.
Yeah, that's why, okay. I was wondering if
Yeah,
you just make it
it's just their
darker.
logo, and I will see if I can find one with a brighter bottom line.
What is the star next to the MSBA? There's an asterisk.
It's the asterisk that's down here on MSBA that explains what MSBA is.
Okay, why don't you do that on the first time you say it?
Ooh, yeah, hey, that's a good idea.
So I did it the first time it said rather than the second?
Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
In light of what was said just a couple of minutes ago, and I realize this is more words, Christine, do we want to have a third bullet that says preserve reserves in anticipation of, or I shouldn't use that phrase because it's loaded, it's loaded. That's loaded. Okay, sorry, my apology. Something reserves in anticipation of a potential recession or a potential change in economic condition.
I still don't like the sombrero, but,
It's not a sombrero.
Yeah.
We said it,
Is it under consideration?
it's under our recommendations for our reserve policy. You're right, I'm not sure. I feel like we've added more to that reserve policy slide. It used to just have the upper and lower threshold, and now we actually have included that, so maybe we don't need this slide as well. Okay. Seems to be redundant.
I like this one better.
You like this one better?
Many fewer words.
It is, but I still need to include, here, if we go back. I gotta get the fade out of there. So this explains the lower threshold, 5% of municipal, and the upper threshold, 5% of total Acton spending. I don't want to cram all of it onto one.
And I want two slides.
You want two
I
slides?
think we need to end with that idea. That was almost the end of the presentation, right?
That was no,
Okay.
there's a couple more.
I think it's worth saying again.
All right, we'll look at the reserve slides. Yeah. Okay. Yep, we will look at that. We will fix that. Because you're right, they're redundant and they should be together. All right, and then land purchases. Stop them. Good. This is always our position in relation to Prop 2.5. Oop, do we have a recession?
In the strength of saying things multiple times, should we say on here, don't use reserves as part of the operating budget?
I think if we order these properly and have this one follow reserves immediately, it probably has that same impact, do you think?
I don't see it.
Right. Okay, we'll look at that.
Go ahead. So this one says operating budget should aim for increases below 2.5%.
I noticed that when I was looking over it today, and I'm not sure what conversation got us into both of those statements.
One's a hard limit.
I think
If you
one's-
go back, if you
Yeah.
go back to the previous slide, it cannot be or should not be above 3. Aiming for something
No more than, yeah.
no more than. 3 is an upper limit, upper bound.
And I think that
2.5 is a target.
And Christy and I have, since we joined the committee, said, well, if it's Prop 2.5, shouldn't it always be 2.5? And I think the pushback we got is that it's never going to be 2.5.
Well,
So which number do we want to?
the long-term revenue model historically shows about 3%,
Right.
which is why we always kind of pin our hopes on 3%. That way, at least you're balancing.
I think because of the coming debt, we were hoping that they'd aim for lower. But it does look a little odd to say both things, so I think we should pick one.
Yeah, I'd say one or the other. Not
Well,
both.
I liked both, because one is a upper limit, the other one is a target. You know, aim for an A, but accept an A minus.
Well, not within 2 slides.
I understand that, but
Well, one says don't go over and one says increases below. It's the same thing. We could say increases below 3%.
Well, one's saying it should aim to increase below 2.5, and the other one's saying don't go over 3.
Which,
That's basically what we're saying.
yeah. So do we want to leave it, or we want to make them both 3?
Hmm?
I think 8, yeah.
You could phrase it that they should, operating budget increases should be 2.5%, but not to exceed 3.
That's a lot of words.
I know, but you got 2 slides, come on.
Based on that lovely tax chart you showed us last time, should we put a little asterisk underneath this saying that Boxborough does it?
I think we can at least be ready in our presenting, should somebody ask about it. Okay, and then the only other thing, it was asked that on these teeny tiny, I'm sure you can read it really well, that I add Stowe and Maynard, and so I added Stowe and Maynard. They definitely show a small decrease in the tax bill as a percentage of income as compared to Acton. I'm happy to send these to anybody who wants to. Actually, I can share the POV with you, but I'll send the original if anybody wants to blow it up and look at these numbers closely. Okay. Yep. And that's it.
So I just want to say thank you for doing this. You've definitely taken over the responsibility on this for the last 2 years, and you're making it more colorful, even though you're taking out too many words. Thank you for taking the lead on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Hearing none. Finance Committee business, do we have any minutes to approve?
We do not. Oh,
How many of us are here from the June 12th meeting?
I have no idea.
Are we all here from the Minuteman meeting?
Oh, we need to vote on the Minuteman meeting minutes.
Mike, how many of us were at, is it all of us?
All of us that were here were present at the Minuteman meeting.
Okay, then we should approve those minutes.
Do I have a motion?
June 12th?
1 second. Yes.
You have those? You have those minutes from the,
We've all read them.
okay, can you submit those, if they're approved, can you submit them to the clerk's office?
I didn't take those minutes. Brian did.
Okay,
And he has.
well, I took them on the Minuteman tour, I
You
took
took
them.
them on the Minuteman tour, yes. And you brought them to the last meeting, and we all read them, but then we realized we
wasn't at the
weren't
la-
all here.
I wasn't at the last meeting, so,
So we didn't approve them.
okay. So do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes from June 12th.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? All right. Any liaison reports? Steve? Jason?
School building committee meets tomorrow, so I'll have something to.
Mike?
Nothing to update. Our school building committee meets next week.
Full Minuteman, all right. Christie?
Kelley's Corner Committee meets on Thursday.
Christine? Don't think we have anything else this evening. Do I have a motion? Mr. Benson, do you have anything to report? No. David? All right. Do I have a motion?
Motion to adjourn.
All those,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Meeting's adjourned.